Today on History's Tech, we are looking at the first United States aircraft ever designed specifically to be a night fighter, the first to have onboard radar. We are looking at the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. While not produced in large numbers like other contemporary fighters of the era, it was a extremely effective night fighter that fought in both European and Pacific theaters and would even see a career into the early 1950s, with a variant of the aircraft even serving almost till 1970. But let's go ahead and look at the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Now, the development of the P-61 comes from this piece of technology, the radio detection and ranging equipment, otherwise known as radar. Now, radar was actually first developed in the late 1800s, but it wasn't until the 1930s that it really began to be heavily experimented with, and a lot of different militaries were starting to see the future application of this, whether it be used for detecting incoming aircraft or utilized to detect ships. There was a lot of potential ideas of what this could be used for. One big idea was the combination of utilizing radar with searchlights and shore-based batteries to create basically a wall of anti-aircraft defenses. But the British kind of took it to the next level with the development of the airborne interceptor radar. And this was a major technological leap. At the time, radars were incredibly large, so the British had actually come up with a way to shrink it down and place it inside an aircraft. Now, while the British had this new piece of technology, they lacked the resources to really begin expanding it and utilizing it more. So this is where we see what's known as the TIZARD mission. Now, the purpose of this group, officially known as the British Technical and Scientific Mission, was basically to create a collaboration between the United Kingdom and the United States during World War II to share R&D secrets. And a big one of these was their new radar that could be enclosed inside of an aircraft. And this leads us into the British Purchase Commission, which was actually tasked with finding a new aircraft for the British to use for night fighting. And so now we have the two elements. We have the British wanting a night fighter and them trading the United States with technology. And so the British Purchase Commission basically puts it out there that they want a new fighter aircraft to be developed because they don't like the current fleet of American fighter aircraft. And multiple companies respond, but really only two come out there with anything that the British want, Douglas and Northrop. Douglas's proposal, the XA-26A, which would eventually become the A-26 Invader, is actually rejected in favor of the Northrop proposal. Now, the original Northrop design is not what we think of today as the P-61. There was no twin boom. It was actually a single tail system, and it was an incredibly heavy aircraft, ridiculously heavy to the point that they actually didn't think it would be a feasible fighter aircraft. So once they got the go-ahead to begin developing the aircraft, Jack Northrop himself began redesigning the aircraft. And a few things were the shift from the single boom to the twin boom system that we know today. And instead of having ventral gun turrets, these guns were moved to the belly and to the wings, making it one of the most heavily armed fighters of World War II. With the design changes completed and the approval of the United States War Department, the XP-61 was born. And this aircraft had a lot of issues with it. Most of it came up to changes from within the military. The Army Air Force changed the design of carburetors for uses on the aircraft, so they had to redesign that. The guns once again were moved on the aircraft. The change for the guns meant that they had to change the fuel system in it to change where the location of the tanks were. So combine this all together, it still took a little while for delaying the aircraft to get it to where it could be a production-ready aircraft. And while the aircraft was finally complete and essentially ready to go in 1942, due to production delays, issues with various components, units didn't start receiving the aircraft until 1944. And even though they were finally deployed in 1944, they were met with a lot of skepticism. In fact, to the point where multiple U.S. units criticized them and wanted to be equipped with de Havilland Mosquitoes instead of the P-61, as these had already been proven. And this actually led to a competition between the Mosquito versus the Black Widow in May of 1944. And it actually proved that the Black Widow could outperform, outturn, and even outgun the Mosquito. In the European theater, it took quite a bit of work to get them to be trusted, but eventually they would prove their worth, shooting down Messerschmitts and Luftwaffe aircraft throughout time and proving their worth, especially in the Battle of the Bulge when they flew heavy cover for the forces there. And eventually, the night fighters would manage to get 3 ace pilots and 2 ace radar operators as a result of the P-61 in the European theater. Now, in terms of other theaters, in the Mediterranean theaters, they were brought in too late to service any good there, so they really didn't contribute to that. But in the Pacific theater, this is where they really showed their continued worth. Basically, they finally deployed the P-61 in June of 1944, and within days, they got their first kill. Now, most missions for the P-61 were basically combat patrol missions. They would fly an area, and every once in a while, they would encounter a Japanese aircraft. But unlike the European theater, where they were outclassed by the new jet aircraft, they could stay on level with pretty much any Japanese aircraft. And importantly, they actually took place in other events with that. They were part of the United States Army Ranger raid to free 500 Allied POWs from Camp Panagatan in the Philippines. And a single one helped fly a complete combat patrol mission. And the Japanese were never really able to outclass the P-61. Now, unlike some other aircraft where I've talked about, where as soon as World War II ended, they basically ended the service of the aircraft, the P-61 basically got an extended service on life. They would be deployed in the United States by groups such as the Strategic Air Command and the Tactical Air Command and the Air Defense Command for various roles, typically for long-range air defense against potential Soviet aircraft. Additionally, the aircraft will be utilized in multiple scientific endeavors. It was utilized for ejection seat experimentations, the Thunderstorm project, which is the first attempt to gather massive amount of data on the development of thunderstorms, how their activity is, by basically flying the aircraft into it and utilizing the radar to pick up anything they could. And they would even be utilized by NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which would eventually become NASA for early scientific research that would go into NASA's development. Now, the Navy attempted its own testing with the P-61, redesignating the P-61 as the F-2T-1. And basically, this was to, one, attempt to see if they could even launch the P-61 off of an aircraft carrier, possibly develop heavier catapult systems for the heavier aircraft, and two, to utilize for other systems. One was their own attempt to basically mimic the Doolittle raid utilizing the P-61 in the hopes of utilizing it on an attack on Japan. And this was basically abandoned because, one, it wasn't a very successful test, and two, the Manhattan Project basically rendered it useless to utilize as an attack on Japan. And after World War II, the Navy temporarily used it as a platform for their development of a ramjet-powered missile, but it was only used for a short amount of time. Now, because of the age of the jet, the United States realized they had to replace the P-61. In the interim, they replaced it with the F-82 Twin Mustang, which was a little bit easier to be utilized for night fighting, while they were starting to develop new jet aircraft to replace the P-61. Now, 3 experimental jet aircraft were evaluated to be the replacement for the P-61, the XP-87, the XP-89, and the XF-3D. Now, what ended up happening is the XP-87 gets abandoned. Nobody wants it. The Air Force takes the XP-89, and that'll eventually become the P-89, later F-89 Scorpion. And the Navy will take the XF-3D, and this will end up becoming the F-3D Skynight. Now, there are multiple variants of the P-61, but the biggest, most important one is going to be the F-15A Reporter. Now, this was a reconnaissance aircraft, and it's so important that it took a majority of the aerial maps of North Korea during the Korean War and would actually serve until 1968 as a reconnaissance aircraft. Now, due to the fact that there was a lower number of these aircraft produced, only 4 P-61s are in existence to this day, with 3 of the aircraft located in the United States and a singular aircraft located in China. But there you have it, a look at the P-61 Black Widow, an aircraft with a rather unusual design, but it's designed that way for a very specific purpose. This was a night fighter. This was an interceptor designed to have a radar on board. So because of that, it got its unique shape. And overall, it had a pretty decent career, even though it didn't serve for a very long time. as a fighter aircraft, but its night role would inspire later aircraft for more and more usage of the radar in a fighting aircraft. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.